the Shroud of Turin. It portrays the image of a man who has inspired millions of people over the centuries. Is this the burial cloth of Jesus of Nazareth? Is the Shroud of Turin a hoax, a brilliant medieval forgery, the artistry of a genius unsurpassed by any of his contemporaries? A carbon dating in 1988 concluded that the cloth was made in the 14th century. But my research over these past 20 years tells a completely different story. I would like to take you on a visual journey to find out more about the man of the shroud. I will show you that the image on this cloth is not that of a man lying in his grave, and that is just one of the several discoveries that may lead to unlocking the secrets of the shroud. The shroud is a linen cloth approximately 14 feet long by 3.5 feet wide. What is unusual about this cloth are the markings which appear to be the back and front image of a man who was buried after a violent death. The shroud has been in the Turin Cathedral for the last 400 years. The shroud was first introduced into Liry, France in the 1350s by a French knight who never revealed the origins of his find. The shroud was later transferred to the House of Savoy and kept in Chambéry, France. It was there, in 1532, that a fire took place that nearly destroyed the shroud. Several burn marks and sewed-on patches that parallel the image still witness to that unfortunate accident. In 1578, the shroud was brought to Turin, where it still remains today. Here, too, it was almost burned, but that was a more recent event. In 1997, the chapel where the cloth is kept caught fire, but fortunately the shroud was unharmed. The fire caused much damage to the cathedral, therefore blocking our view to this stronghold of the shroud. My personal interest in the shroud started in 1961 when I read a book by the French surgeon Dr. Pierre Barbet, who had done extensive research on the cloth. My fascination with Dr. Barbet's book finally brought me here to Turin in 1978 to see the shroud. What caused Barbet and others to become interested in the shroud was an event that took place in 1898. An Italian photographer, Secondo Pia, took pictures of the shroud, and while developing them in his darkroom, saw in his large negative plate the positive image of a man. How could this be? He finally realized that the original shroud image was a negative. How did a photographic negative get onto an ancient cloth when photography was only invented in the 19th century? But our story is not here in Turin, it is in Jerusalem. For if this is actually the burial cloth of Jesus, the story and the proof are in Israel. In about 30 AD, a drama took place in this city of Jerusalem. A young rabbi was arrested, beaten, and condemned to death. Under the Roman government, he died one of the most horrible deaths ever invented, crucifixion. The wounds seen on the shroud image have a striking similarity to the biblical descriptions of Jesus' crucifixion. The blood marks of the wrists and feet, the scourge marks all over the body, the beaten face are all seen on the shroud. Barbet, the French surgeon, taught me a lot about the shroud. I would like to show you some of his findings. Looking at the face, there's a swelling here under the eye compared to the other side. as if this man had been beaten on the face. Now, looking at the wrists and feet, we see that there's some nail marks. These are anatomically correct, because if the nails were placed in the palms of the hand, the weight of the body would have torn through the flesh. Barbet also discovered that when a nail is placed through the wrist of a freshly amputated arm, the thumb folds in the palm, leaving 4 fingers and no thumb. This is exactly what we see on the shroud. Now let's turn to the back. These scourge marks on the back come in pairs and are dumbbell in shape. These are the same kind of injuries that would have been caused by a Roman flagrum. The scourge marks on the upper back are slanted upward. On the lower back, they are horizontal, and on the lower legs, they are again slanted, as if somebody were scourging this man like this, and like this. These pictures were presented to me by the American scientific photographer Vernon Miller. In 1978, his team had taken pictures of the shroud at the image area of the nose at 32 times and 64 times magnification. These photographs caused me to conclude that the image was definitely not painted. The yellow fibers at the top of the threads is the source of the image. There is no sign of paint. This micrograph picture was taken at 32 times magnification over a blood mark. Now, Dr. Alan Adler, a blood chemist, was given actually fibers and particles from the shroud that were taken in 1978. Now, he looked at the particles and he discovered that these particles were indeed blood. Also, another scientist by the name of Bima Bologna, an Italian, made the same discovery. Now let's look at the shroud fibers. Dr. Alan Adler found that the yellow shroud fibers that are responsible for the image were caused by a dehydrative oxidation. This process affects the cellulose, causing it to yellow. It's like a degradation of the fiber, like an aging process. Heat, light, and acid can cause this, but the shroud image has never been reproduced when looking at it at the microscopic level. In 1978, Dr. John Jackson, a physicist, organized a group to study the shroud. At that time, Eric Jumper, an engineer, teased at the fibers and found that the yellow fibers causing the image were only 1 to 2 fibers deep. He also found that as the yellow fiber dipped under the cross thread, it turned white. Therefore, no liquid could have been used to paint the image. Otherwise, the coloring would have wicked along the fiber and the yellowing would be seen under the cross fiber. We do not know how this was done. Each fiber of linen that caused the image had the same amount of yellow color as all the other yellow fibers. What caused the shading was that in the darker areas there were more yellow fibers than in the light areas. Therefore, the image can be compared to modern newspaper print. If you want the area darker, put in more dots. After visiting the Shroud exhibition in Turin in 1978, I did some of my own research to find out more about the Shroud. My first question was, what were the burial customs of the Jews? Why did I ask that question? Because the Gospel of John states that they took the body of Jesus and wrapped it with the spices in linen cloths, according to the burial custom of the Jews. I knew that the Jewish burial custom was to wash the body prior to burial. However, in my studies, I found that there was an exception to the rule of washing, and that was that if a man died a violent death, then the blood was not washed from his body, but he was simply buried in a cloth. In that Jesus was buried according to the Jewish burial custom, the blood was not washed from his body. Therefore, the shroud with its blood marks is historically compatible with the Gospel of John. From From this point on, I began to do some of my own experiments to find out more about the blood marks. I began by first looking at an off-image blood mark located at the left elbow. See the blood mark off the left elbow? How did it get here? Over the years, I had several theories, but no answer. I finally took the full-size shroud, wrapped it around me, and this is what I found. Here is a full-size tracing of the off-image blood mark placed over a man. See how it drapes, touching the back of the upper arm. This blood flow began at the wrist and, following gravity, flowed down the back of the upper arm, formed a small round pool of blood, then dripped to the ground.